Before we get started, let me tell you about Spotify for Podcasters. It is a great app that I use to actually put together my podcast episodes. I record them there and get them edited and trimmed and such. And then from there, I can actually put them on any podcasting platform that I may want to. So if podcasting is something that you feel you might be interested in, check out Spotify for Podcasters. Now, let's get on with the program. Hey guys, just wanted to wrap up a couple of things from past lessons before we get too far ahead of ourselves and start diving into lesson 3. So the first thing comes from lesson 1, and that was that I said trumpets instead of trumpet, and I just wanted to clear that up because I don't want to have any confusion or anything. So the first verse that we're going to look at is Matthew 24:31. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. The second verse comes from 1 Corinthians 15:52. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. And then from episode 2, I mentioned Greenland having volcanic activity. That was actually wrong. It's actually Iceland, so I apologize. And then I also wanted to add in, to kind of be along the lines of like counting our blessings and everything, a shekel is actually 26 cents in today's dollar. So people were making less than a shekel and having to try and live off of that. So it's really impressive how blessed we really are, and we need to keep it in mind as we go about our lives and to try and keep that focus on God and what he has given us. And I think we'll do a lesson on giving back one of these days, but I've got a few other things that I want to do first. But let's go ahead and dive on into our lesson. Before we get started today, I figured I would tell you guys a little bit more about myself. I realized this morning that I really hadn't told you guys too much about me. I have said, I'm a trash man, and hinted at the fact that I have a family, but I really hadn't divulged too much. So my wife and I, we've been married for 13 years, together for 14. We have a kid. I prefer kid over child terminology wise. I'm not one of those people that says child, so for me to say it sounded weird in my head. I like sushi. I like food in general, really. I enjoy cooking when I get the chance. I really don't get very many opportunities to, but I like to smoke. I like to, as far as meats, I should probably specify, I like to smoke different foods and stuff. Cheesecakes are a big thing this time of year for me to cook as we're getting closer to Thanksgiving and Christmas. My brain blanked on what holidays were coming up. But food, like I said, I like to hunt, obviously, from different things that have been said in the past couple episodes. I like being outdoors. I do really enjoy working with my hands and being a trash man like I am, because it can be a physical job. It's not as physical for me as what it used to be, I guess. Obviously, I still get out and I still have to throw things in the truck and whatnot, but I used to run what is called a rear load. Now I would typically do a side load or a front load. But I used to have to run to the back for every single stop, manually load it myself, unless it had a cart that I could use our tipper for. But even a lot of times then, there's still a lot of manual labor that goes into it, even if you are using the lift. And it was a very, very physically demanding job. It still is, in various ways. Running yard waste, you're usually getting out and grabbing bundles of sticks or bags or something at some point or other throughout the route, and so it can still be a physically demanding job. Let's see, I used to announce monster truck shows. Currently not doing any monster truck stuff at the moment, other than trying to work on Making Tracks issue 2, which is a comic book series I'm trying to get started. I've done one issue already, and I hadn't been putting links in the descriptions to any of my books and stuff lately, just because I really didn't think it was necessary, but maybe it is, because you guys might be interested in buying my stuff. I don't know. At least you can go look at it if the links are in the description. So I'm going to start putting the links in the description. I like writing poetry. I really enjoy writing poetry. That's a lot of fun to me. I try to challenge myself whenever I do, trying to bend words a few different ways or whatever, what rhymes with this, or what's an almost rhyme, something that's like close but it's not quite. I like doing those a lot. And country music, and well, all music really inspires a lot, but especially country music, and not the stuff that you hear on the radio per se. A lot of stuff that you would hear on mainstream radio is just not my thing. I prefer guys more like Cody Jinks, Tyler Childers. Man, I don't know why I'm making this hard on myself. Like, talking about myself should not be this hard, but I feel like I am struggling. Sports-wise, I used to be more of a sports guy, but nowadays, I might watch a little bit of a football game or turn on a NASCAR race for a little bit, but I just not really into sports anymore. I'd much rather write, read, play video games. Oh, Dungeons and Dragons. I love playing Dungeons and Dragons. That's something that recently started within like the past 2 years with my son and I, as we've really become big fans of D&D, and that's a lot of fun. And we've actually got a couple of groups that we do. Like, we had one group from our congregation of kids, and the group got so big we actually had to break it into 2 different groups. So there, for a good chunk of 2023, I don't know why I said it that way, because I almost always say 2023, we were doing one weekend with what we called the older group, and then we were doing a second weekend with what we called the younger group. And so we were playing D&D at least twice a week, but really my son and I, we were playing anywhere from 3 to 4 times most weeks. But I got busy and we had to pretty much completely drop it off, which was kind of a bummer, and we're trying to get it started back up. But yeah, I don't know, I guess that's pretty much it about me. I work, I love my family, try to be better for them, and I do a couple of fun things. I want to get better at fishing. I want to learn, like, study, I guess, in a sense, fishing like I have done hunting, because whenever I first started hunting, I started diving in, like, listening to podcasts and stuff and being just absolutely like, what more can I learn? Like, how can I, study essentially how to be productive, and watching videos and different things. So I think that's something that I do want to try to do, is figure out fishing in kind of the same sense that I have hunting, because, like, for me, fishing is almost, put a worm on the hook, or, I've used cicadas before and actually had pretty good luck with cicadas. Put some sort of bug on the hook, or put a fake worm on the hook or whatever, and just throw it out there. But I know there's more to it than that, and so I would like to be more knowledgeable. But now I think we pretty well covered it all. Coffee. I love coffee. Not like a snob per se, but I do enjoy coffee. I'm not like super picky, I guess, but I am picky all at the same time. So I don't do Starbucks. I prefer Dunkin' if I'm gonna get coffee out. I do enjoy my cold brew. Cold brew is really good. Stoke used to be way easier to get, like way more accessible. And when I say way more accessible, you used to be able to buy it at gas stations and stuff in like individual bottles. But now you can only buy like the bigger bottles at like Walmarts and Targets and stuff. So it's not as easily acceptable, which kind of bums me out. And then I brew at my house a lot, cold brew wise. I got a cold brew filter for Christmas a couple years ago, and been using it a lot.
All right, so today's Bible verses, we're going to first start by looking at Genesis 45, 1 through 11. And I'm going to go ahead and read this whole thing. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land for these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me in the land of Goshen. Nope, I messed that up. Near me, you and your children, and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty. Next one is Matthew 21:12 through 13. And Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple. And he overturned tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He said to them, It is written, My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers. Luke 4:25 through 30 is our next one. But in truth, I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, and a great famine came over all the land. And Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. When they heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath, and they rose up and drove him out of the town, and brought him to the brow on the hill on which their town was built, so they could throw him down the cliff. But passing through their midst, he went away. And when those... Luke 22:49 through 53 is our next group of verses. And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, No more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and officers of the temple and elders who had come out against him, Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. Next one's Romans 12:18 through 21. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Good morning. I say morning because I'm sure somebody out there will be listening to this in the morning, as well as I am recording this on a morning at 3:20 in the morning as I'm headed to work. That was one of the rules that I had that I wanted to keep, was that I would not be recording this of a morning on my way into work, just because 3:20 brain in the morning is way different than 3:20 brain in the evening. But I'm feeling pretty good right now. I'm well rested. I have a caffeinated beverage, and things are good. With that being said, our title for today's episode is Men of Peace. So I'm going to put it to you in a couple of different ways. The first one, this is for all the St. Louis area people that are listening. A buddy of mine in his lesson yesterday, having no idea that this is something that I was even talking about, brought up, how many of you people drive 270? For those of you who don't know what 270 is a highway that runs north and south through the
like western corner of St. Louis, I guess would be the best way to put it. It does eventually like cut up through St. Louis, but it is a very, very trafficy highway because it connects to 70, it connects to 55, and a bunch of other of our main highways here in this area of our state, and it's always trafficy. This past week, trying to get home from work, it's taken me about 2 hours just to get home from work, and it's usually about an hour, so it has doubled my time. And I don't know if it's like some sort of holiday traffic, like people are having to go into the office right now whereas the rest of the year they didn't, or what the exact deal is, but it has not been fun. Yeah, so like my earliest commute was an hour and a half last week, like heading home wise. But his whole point was, if you drive 270, you have sinned against your brother. Why? Because there's just so much traffic. It was a tongue-in-cheek joke, and it was very, very funny for those of us obviously in class, because we're from the area, and if we drive 270, we know what he's talking about. But it's not a very peaceful way to go, and there's been people in this local area that have actually, there's been a couple of really serious road rage incidents where somebody has actually pulled guns on people and shot them, and that's obviously not being a man of peace, is it? And I think the world is going the way of obviously being opposite of peace, and you know, the whole toxic masculinity thing of, oh, well, we're men, and I say that kind of in almost in a tongue-in-cheek way too, but I guess there is some truth to it, because if you examine the Bible, we're supposed to be peaceful, and that is the idea of what God wants us to be as Christian men. And another one that comes to mind is from one of my favorite movies, Josie Wales, where a young bounty hunter comes to claim the bounty on Josie, and Josie tells him, dying ain't no way to make a living, boy. And again, very, very true. And so, are we men of peace, or are we more like the world in that sense, where we I guess there's the saying that went around there for a while, do we wake up and we choose violence? I mean, I think about obviously that Joseph with his brothers and everything, and you know, at one point his brothers even wanted to kill him after they ripped the coat and were trying to decide what they were going to do with him, and Reuben stuck up and said, no, let's not kill him. And eventually, whenever you get down the line, I mean, he could have chose to imprison them all and do all kinds of horrible things to them and get revenge himself, and he didn't. He chose peace. He tested them to see if they were going to be good people or not, and they did choose to. They were sorrowful. They had learned from their mistakes, is I think a good way to put it. Although their actions were never. Their dad Jacob dies is really interesting, because it's like they don't trust Joseph, although he showed great examples of peace at the dinner and was like, I am your brother, I am Joseph, and he was like tearful, like the dude wept. And he did more than just invite them to dinner and have a dinner with them and everything else. He even brought them there and had them live with him, and he took care of them. He was that example of peace that I think is a great example from the Old Testament that we can have. And there's even great examples of being peaceful from the New Testament that we can draw from, obviously the main one being Jesus. But one of the biggest ones, I think, is from the Garden of Gethsemane with Jesus, where we see one of the disciples strike with the sword and cut off Malchus's ear, and Jesus is like, no, that's not what we're doing here. We're gonna, he puts the ear back on and goes with them quietly. And even throughout the entire trial process, he is calm, quiet, and peaceful. He was nervous in the garden and prayed fervently, but whenever it came down to it, like with Pontius, he was very, very calm, well put together. He didn't become a mess and yell, scream. The song goes, he could have called 10,000 angels, and he didn't call 10,000 angels. He went through with the plan, so to speak, and went to the cross, whereas it didn't have, he could have chose not to do that. He could have been like, yeah, nope, it's not going to be this way. And like, think back to whenever he was being tempted by the devil. He could have chose any of the, lust of the flesh, boastful pride of life. He could have chose any of the main sins, so to speak, any of the temptations that was put before him, but he didn't. He went ahead and stayed with the plan to bring about, the avenue that we have before us to become Christians and to follow him, to take up our own cross and to be like him. And to be like him would be to have peace. Obviously, we have a temple where he drives out the money changers and everything else, but there is such a thing as, a correct way to have anger and to do things. And I think we have a lot of examples of that as well, where people handle their anger correctly, but we also have those examples of where people don't handle their anger correctly and don't do things the right way. I think of Saul a lot, from King Saul, where he did not handle himself correctly, whereas when David sinned and did things that he shouldn't have done, he makes the right atonements for it and asks for the forgiveness and, writes sorrowful psalms about how he had sinned and everything, and having that repentance and wanting to do right for the Lord, because he had that heart for the Lord. Like everybody says, David was a man after God's own heart. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember, is if a guy like David can do the things that David did and still be a man after God's own heart, we need to strive to have that same goal of trying to be that man after God's own heart. And if we're doing what we have been instructed to from Jesus, we will do that. And another thing to point out with David, David was a man of war. David had killed his 10,000s where Saul has killed his thousands. And he still had that heart for God, like we have discussed, but he wanted to build a temple for God. I live in, my house, whereas God lives in a tent, which that was a man's thought. That wasn't even, God's thought. But God said whenever David went to do it, you can't do this. And obviously I am summarizing. Please go read it for yourself. But, God says, you can't do this, but the reason is because you have blood on your hands. Because David had blood on his hands, he could not build the temple. However, his son Solomon could, because he was a man of peace. Maybe not so much in the sense that I'm wanting to get across here, but it gives you the idea of what it means to not be a man of war, where he didn't kill people. Obviously, he had his own baggage that he had to deal with, but he was still striving to be a man of peace. And
think that it's huge that when there's that, God gives them the option to choose, well, what do you want? Do you want money? Do you want intelligence? Well, I want intelligence so I can lead my people better. Because you made the right choice, you're going to gain crazy amounts of wealth. And I think that that's big. I think that shows the power of knowledge, and kind of backs up the whole idea of him being a man of peace. Obviously, him and his dad both did wrong by marrying people outside of the Jewish nation, which it was, mentioned by God that was wrong. Was you guys should not be marrying outside of the Jewish nation, because he didn't want these other idols mixed in and everything else. So wrongs were still committed, but the striving to be what he was supposed to be, we need to strive. Will we fail? Absolutely. But thankfully, we have the avenue of forgiveness that we can use. And I think a lot about the whole idea of there was a quote by Teddy Roosevelt where he talks about having speaking softly and carrying a big stick. He speaking softly. You're not yelling and screaming and shaking your fist and everything else. It's, hey, this, you have wronged me in this way, and I don't appreciate it, and having a discussion. But at the same time, we should be able to defend ourselves. And I think that is extremely key as well. I'm not saying not defending yourself and being quote unquote soft, I guess, but more of being, is not peace and discussing things a better way to handle things? Just think about it. Yeah, violence is solved, whatever you can say, with war and different things like that. But think about if you could use your words, put yourself in a diplomatic position. If you could use your words to save thousands of young men from dying, would you use your words, or would you just go ahead and let all them young men die? Personally, I like to think, obviously I'm armchair quarterbacking here, but I would like to think that I would choose to use my words and save as many lives as I possibly could, because we could achieve a peace of some sort in a military situation. I do think it's better to talk things out. Those of you who are married, if you've ever been in a shouting match with your spouse or whatever, would it not have just been better to calmly talk things out? And sometimes we slip up in that way and we get into those kinds of situations. We're human. We're, thankfully we have forgiveness, because we can go back and correct those things. It's funny because this wasn't supposed to be episode 3 at all. Like, this wasn't even a thought that I had for a podcast episode. It was, this was actually supposed to be something entirely different, but I moved that episode to episode 5 because I still want to stick with having episode 4 being a prosperity episode. But this all came together from, I was walking out of Taco Bell with my lunch on Friday and was at the mindset of thinking about a situation that had happened that day, and I thought to myself, well, being tempted to, a situation came about on Friday where this whole mindset came to mind, and I was thinking about it as I was leaving said Taco Bell, where it crossed my mind, man, being a man of peace is a big ordeal. And modern day society seems to want to call out toxic masculinity and how awful it is, but at the same time, it wants to, say, oh, you're soft and weak if you want peace and yada, 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 all at the same time, which is very contradictory. Which one do you want? And so I think that it's even more important to open the Bible and to study about peace and how we should conduct ourselves as peaceful men. And I think that it's very, very clear that God wants that for us, because even in describing what it takes to be an elder or a deacon, it's, we have to have a good upstanding reputation in our community, and that we, need to not be quick with anger. And that is something that I've been working on a lot. Like, I used to have a really bad temper. I've gotten to, I don't know if toned down or tamed would be the right word. I prefer reserved, where I'm holding it back and trying to align it and use it correctly, and use like you would say to a toddler, use your words. I've been trying to really gain that kind of control over it, and to have that kind of right focus. And even if I never be a deacon or an elder, I want to meet those kinds of qualifications, because if you're meeting those qualifications to be a deacon or an elder, you're following God's word. And so I think that that's really important to look at it in that kind of mindset of, well, I may never fill one of those positions, but I need to live like I'm going to, because to be in those positions, you are a righteous man. Can you make mistakes and have to repent for things? Absolutely. But if you're striving to meet that goal, you can strive to meet the goal of going to heaven. And that's my point. So we should all strive to be men of peace, not quick to anger, and to have that kind of focus. How big is it to not seek the revenge on our enemy, but to feed them? Hey man, have you had lunch yet? Hey man, you're looking a little tired. You want a ghost or a monster? Cup of coffee? Obviously, that's not the same thing as thirsty. Thirsty would be you want a bottle of water, but you get the idea. And to go that extra mile. Hey man, everybody else is done with their route. Do you need help? I think about going that extra mile to, are we going that extra mile for our quote unquote enemy? Feeding them hunger, feeding them when they are hungry, giving them something to drink when they are thirsty, helping them when they need help. Because are they going to see that example anywhere else? Or are they going to see it with us? And, if somebody sees, hey, I've had issues with this person in the past, maybe not so much an enemy, but maybe more like you've been gruff with someone or whatever. Maybe you're the only one that they're going to see that's a lot of that. So I got into a loop there. Maybe you are going to be the only one that they see that kind of example from. There we go. And what if you messed it up? And now, because you messed it up, in coming episodes, we will look at the parable of the soil. But what if you just threw rocks in that dirt? What now? So I think that's one of the biggest things that I can think of at the moment why we should be peaceful. Because if we're not going to be peaceful, then we're more like the world than we are like Christ, and then we could be out there damaging good soil. Is that really what we want to do? It's not what I want to do. I think we're getting pretty close to the end here, so we're gonna go ahead and get ready to wrap it up. Strive to be more peaceful the next week. and then the week after that, and the week after that. And thank you for coming and spending time with me as we try to grow as Christians. Something I haven't done is mention my socials and stuff. So I guess if you want to start following me on other things, you can follow me at Facebook at Justin's, like my name, Justin, _S, stories, STORIES, because, they're my stories. And that's kind of where I've been trying to, talk about my writing and different things. And it's this, you can search the same thing on Instagram as well as TikTok. I haven't posted very many videos lately. That's something that I need to work on, I reckon. But you can follow me there. I hope you guys have a good week. I hope you guys enjoy your Thanksgiving. And lastly, I'm going to leave you with this passage. I wanted to leave you guys with a verse from 2 Thessalonians because I thought Paul's words for the congregation at Thessalonica were so excellent toward the brethren that it would be a great way to end today's episode. So from 2 Thessalonians 3:16, we have, "Now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times and every way. The Lord be with you all."